Hello, good morning from Seattle, Washington, where Sainey and I are currently. My name is Ibrahim Sonko. I am the host of the Dialectic Space podcast. And my guest today is my big brother and friend, who I've had the pleasure to know for the last decade or some years. Sainey MK Marenah is the founder and editor in chief of the Alcamba Times, a veteran journalist who has contributed significantly to the media landscape of not only the Gambia, but generally around the African continent, and also fairly to add reportings around the world as well. Sainey is based here in Washington, specifically in Seattle, and continues to work and report on issues around matters in the Gambia, but also around the African continent. So I have the pleasure to welcome Sainey MK Marina as our guest on the Dialectic Space podcast. As we venture into his public life in journalism in the Gambia, we'll also talk about his arrest during the regime of former President Yahya Jammeh, and which forces him into exile. And then I will also assess the current media landscape of the Gambia and the performance of the current government in regards to access to information and media performance in our country. But most importantly, we'll also venture into what areas or gaps exist in our media landscape that warrants the founding of Alcamba Times, which continues to play a very significant role in our media landscape. I do want to begin by saying that, Sainey, congratulations on the Alcamba Times. I think the improvements that, or at least the stories that you've been actually putting out and the celebrations that you've been putting out in terms of Gambians who are doing incredibly well in various spheres of their career is one that everybody can agree that are adding a lot of value to our public space. You're constantly celebrating Gambians. You're constantly bringing Gambian stories to our platforms. You're constantly making stories about Gambians making waves in their various professions, and especially in academia. That speaks to the role that you continue to play in our space. So for that, I really want to tell you that we see you. We're giving you a shout out to you and your team in the Gambia for what is really a very important job that you guys are doing. So Saini seems to be gone for a little bit, but hopefully he comes back right back on, and we'll continue. But for those of you here, welcome to the Dialectic Space podcast. Please consider subscribing to our YouTube platform and also follow Alcamba Times because they're doing an important job when it comes to media work in the Gambia. But Saini is right back. Saini, how are you doing today?
Hey, Ibrahim, thank you so much. It's good to catch up with you again. And then thank you. I think we inspire you to be a podcast host now because most of your friends are either media personalities or they are social media influencers. Glad that you have taken this opportunity to also come your experience and your love of storytelling. So it's great to be on your show this morning.
Thank you so much, Saini. Actually, that's a very important point you just highlighted. I'm deeply inspired by what you do, and I think my relationship with you and watching you over the years have really been very inspirational to me to begin to undertake this journey. So I can certainly say that you've actually really inspired me in terms of, because you've also been very encouraging over the years. You've always also celebrated me in my journey in my very young career in public life. So I really appreciate that. So it's such an honor to talk to you today. So we're really going to, dive into it quickly. Sainey MK Marina, if you'd walk us very briefly to who is this man behind the media? Who is this man behind all of the brilliantly and well investigated journalistic articles that we see, or this man behind the microphone that we hear so often in our media landscape in the Gambia? Who is Sainey Marenah, and where are you from in the Gambia, and why journalism?
Abraham, thank you very much. And then I will also use this opportunity to welcome my audience because I am the one who normally interview people and put them on the spotlight. So today I am being put on the spotlight by someone I know, someone who loves journalism, though you are not a journalist, but now gradually, I will call it a transition. So basically, I don't need much introduction because a lot of people know that Kenny MK Marena as someone who fought Jammeh's brutal dictatorship, leading to his exile in Dakar, and also, work with international media to spotlight the human rights violations that, that Gambia has witnessed during Jammeh's brutal dictatorship. So I am Sainey Marenah, a young boy from Kudang, Alkamba, where the name of my platform comes from. I attended Kudang Lower Basic School, primary school, you might call it, and then, Kudang Junior Secondary School, and later, because they believe that I am stubborn, so they said, we have to take this guy to Armitage. If you know, Armitage is the only boarding school, government boarding school in the country where students live in campus for a period of time during their studies. So I went to Armitage High School. And from Armitage, just like many other young Gambians who are eager, to start a career, we call it from high school to newsroom, and during Jammeh's time, when we criticize him, the critics will be like, don't mind him, he's just from high school to the newsroom without no experience. But that guy from Armitage was able to hold those powerful people to account. So for me, it's a great experience from high school to newsroom. I started journalism at the age of 20, I would say. And now I have been in journalism for the past, 20 years at a very tender age. And a lot of people, those I graduated will be like, MK, why do you choose journalism? Because then the environment was so brutal. Nobody there want to be a journalist under Yaya Jammeh's Gambia. But, because of my passion, when I was going to Armitage, I was part of what we call the Current Affairs. It's a press club, where those who are interested to be journalists, join the club, to, help, build our writing skills. So I was an art student. I did arts. And my favorite subjects then were government history and literature. If you notice, in some instances, you will hear people who know me will call me Banziman. So, you might hear that name, Emparo Banziman. I get that name from, my love for literature in Armitage. I used to, play a novel called Swazi Banzi is Dead. It's about a racial discrimination in South Africa. So I got that name because of my love for literature. So basically, as I said, from high school to newsroom, I started with Today newspaper as a freelance reporter way back in 2007-8. And I went to the Point newspaper where I become a senior legal and National Assembly correspondent for almost 6-7 years. And from the Point, I resigned from the Point, and then I went to Standard newspaper. Standard came newly around 2010. So I worked with Standard briefly and then also freelance for a Voice newspaper. And I got arrested because I authored a story about political defection in 2013. There were a group of diehard supporters. We call them the Green Youths. Then they're very powerful. They are like when they are like the Janjaweed militants. They only while the Janjaweeds in Sudan bear arms, but they're very powerful. So 19 of them decided to cross carpet to the opposition United Party. So I went to Tangier to play event and published the story on The Voice. Few days later, the notorious now renamed National Intelligence Agency. Then it was NIA, now SIS. I got arrested, taken to Sanyang for a couple of days, and later taken to Banjul, and then I was charged with publication of false news with intent to cause fear and alarm. Can you imagine? Police in the 19 green elected from the APRC were to be charged with false publication with intent to cause what fear or alarm is laughable then. So I was arrested with the editor of the Voice newspaper, Musa Sarif, and we spent 11 months in the courts. 11 months we were going up and down. You know, you remember Magistrate Lamin Bahi, who was on Fali Fatera show a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about me, you know, that I was among many of the high-profile cases he dealt with. And this Lamin grand bail, you know, so, and the trial started, but before the trial finished, Lamin was moved into another guy, you know, so I become the first Gambian journalist in many decades to win a journalist case in a court. I was acquitted and discharged because the prosecution believed, the court believed that there was not enough evidence to secure a conviction because what I reported was the truth, you know. So, but because they didn't want that story to be out, I was arrested. So I was discharged. I was discharged less than 24 hours. I got reports that, you know, they are coming for me, you know, and you know how dangerous Gambia was under Jammeh. And for my own safety, a young journalist, I decided to flee for my own safety to the neighboring country, Dakar, Senegal, where, you know, we all know Dakar was a sanctuary, you know, for Gambian dissidents, including politicians, you know, journalists, lawyers who are running persecution from their own government. So I spent a couple of days. Maybe you may want to explore life in exile, but basically that's me. You know, Amite Newsroom to the Exile, and then founded Alcamba Times and many other things.
Oh, thank you very much for laying that out for us to really know MK Marenah, where he came from, but also in terms of where you started when it comes to journalism. And I just want, before we venture in detail in regards to your exile, I just really want you to dive a little bit into just the appreciation of freedom of speech and freedom of expression, especially for our journalists in the Gambia. Now, we understand during the realm of former President Jammeh for 22 years, there was a lot of stifling of information and a lot of media reports that are contrary to what the government considers favorable are being faced with issues as one that you face in the hands of the then government of the Gambia. What appreciation from that experience do you have for freedom of speech, of freedom of the media, of freedom of journalists in a country like Gambia that was undergoing such a brutal dictatorial regime then?
No, we call it a hellhole on earth. You know, it's a hellhole on earth for journalists. You know, under Yahya Jammeh's time, because most of the journalists, you know, practice what we call self-censorship at the time, because nobody want to, you know, publish a story that will land you in problem. Editors were so careful as to what they will print on their cover. So, you know, because the laws there were so draconian, you know, we have the worst draconian media laws during Jammeh's 22 years. That's why I'm not happy with this coalition government, because the first thing, this is among many coming, they're going to reform bad laws, you know, that is to repeal those draconian media laws on law on sedition, law on libel, law on false publication. But 9 years still, you know, the reforms are so slow. So to me, that's the first point the coalition government failed Gambians, because reforming those bad laws was one of the campaign promises, you know, of the coalition government, and also, you know, reforming the security sector, and also bringing in a new constitution, and also, you know, prosecuting crimes committed by Jammeh. And we have seen the work CRC did. We have seen the work the CRC did in trying to constitution. I know later on in the discussion we will process, which I am part and parcel, because I serve that body for 3 years as the head of media and communication. So I have a working knowledge of what actually happened in building that draft constitution for Gambia. So basically, Ibrahim, I think being a journalist under Yaya Jammeh, was the most difficult thing any Gambian journalist could do. And, I call them warriors. So now when I see journalists, prolification of media houses, every Tom, Dick, and Harry picking up a mic, and, it's good for our Democrats. Credit the Barrow administration for that, because under Jammeh, this was non-existent. But now you have seen a lot of people, media houses, spraying across the country. I think that is what we fought for, even though even though challenges still exist in the Gambia, because the media laws are still there. If you write such a story, the government deemed false, you could go to jail for it. But even that, still we have seen a lot of media houses. So to me, being a journalist under Jammeh's era is more challenging and difficult than now under, President Adam Barrow.
MK, to that point, though, I think sometimes, and on this platform, we don't like to politicize stuff. We like to call things for what they are. I think we can actually credit the Gambian government for their, openness to allow some level of media freedom and media personalities to do their job without subjecting them to at least a systemic attack or violations, or at least constantly being taken to court for the stories that they write. Although we've seen some incidents where the government have overstepped to say that, oh, we've not allowed this. Yeah, we do not appreciate this story, and they try to drag journalists to court. But in terms of systematically how it was happening between the 22 years of former President Gambia and where it is now, we can say objectively that I think Gambia have made some progress in that respect. Now, you eventually left the Gambia for your own safety to flee persecution that was eminent from the Gambian government, and went to Senegal, which was a sanctuary for a lot of Gambian dissidents then, who were running away from the repressive government of former President Yahya Jammeh. And while in Senegal, you had the opportunity to work with a lot of international media organizations as a freelance journalist. Talk to me what inspired that and what that experience has been like for you so far.
Come on again, I didn't get you.
I know. It's okay. I know you're trying to get the Alcamba followers to join us as well on your.
Yeah. I'm trying to get that done here, and I'm seeing this guy. Anyway, that's not important. But go ahead. Let me get that question again.
Yes. Tell our Alcamba followers we have just an hour to wrap this up, so we'll get back to them as soon as possible. But yes, specifically, you left to go to Senegal, and then while there, you had an opportunity to work with a lot of international media organizations as a freelance journalist. How has that experience really shaped you or built you into the journalist that you are today?
Ibrahim, everything happens for a reason, and I think my going to Dakar was a huge blessing in a blessing in disguise. Because when I left Gambia, I was just a print journalist. We call it a newspaper journalist, a reporter with a notebook, go to the court or the National Assembly, or go and do investigation, come and write your story. The next day is published on the print. But moment I went into exile, that has changed everything about my career. I was able to explore other areas in broadcast journalism. I was able to transition into radio and TV journalism. While in Dakar, I was able to, work with a couple of international media houses where I would freelance and also serve as a fixer. Like if they need an information on Gambia, or if they need an information about West Africa, they contact me, and then I will put them in touch with the sources. I have worked with Africa Democracy Radio also for a couple of months, and this has really saved my experience in radio production. I have also did some work with ZDF, that is German largest television network. I have done documentary with them on sport, how West African players are, traffic into Europe with promise of giving them, a contract and so I have done stories on human trafficking with them too, and I have done a documentary, with Al Jazeera on the Muruts, the Muruts in the Murut Brotherhood in Tuba, so those have really shaped my experience and my understanding of the wider journalism work, because in Gambia I was just a mere print journalist, but moving into exile I was able to expand my coverage to those areas in TV and radio broadcasting. And then I have also been a very vocal critic of the Jammeh regime. I remember I had an interview with Bola Musu of BBC around 2014, 2015 about Gambia. And when after the interview, Bola called me. He was like, "Wow, MK, I love the interview, but it seems you're wearing it too hard." Meaning, I sound more activist, like I was trying to, spotlight what was actually. So I was kind of emotional, and he was like, "I understand you are a victim and you are a journalist, and you also trying to raise awareness about what was going on." So while I was in exile, I was wearing double cap. I was, more of an activist journalist who, will, expose human rights violations. I have attended a lot of forums locally and internationally where I talk about human rights violations, happening in the Gambia. I have also provided information to a couple of human rights organizations documenting human rights violations in the country. So I have done a lot of work outside my media job during the time of dictatorship, all because I want an end to self-perpetuating rule of Yaya Jammeh. And we succeeded collectively, in 2016, when Gambians say no, we want change, and voted out the ex-president Jammeh, and then Adama Barrow came in with the coalition government. So Dakar experience is huge. I think it's a blessing in disguise for me, because that's where I build most of my international media contacts and network with international human rights organizations. So to me, Exile did me a great, though I miss Gambia, because living in exile, it's not an easy experience. You have to be strong, you have to psychologically, it can weak you, just like how we have seen with Jammeh. A lot of people were like, Jammeh wanted to come home. Yes, because living in exile psychologically, it's crazy. You have to be strong because you live alone, you are scared, you miss your friends, you miss your family. So but I'm happy that Jammeh is now enjoying exile, simply of the fact that he took a lot of people, to exile. So now he has had first-hand experience of how, living in exile is. So that alone, I'm happy that he experienced, exile like many of us. In fact, he's experiencing it more than us because we spent, let's say, 4 years in exile. Jammeh is now in his 9th year in exile. So he is badly homesick, but it will also teach him lesson that no comment. You might punish people today, tomorrow you might be, a victim too. So one has to be very careful. So Ibrahim Exile was a great experience for me. It has opened a lot of doors, and it has also prepared me, professionally, in my career.
MK, we also know over the years that people that are being exiled and who are vocal critics of the human rights violations, or who were sounding alarm on what was happening in the Gambia, were also not exempted from what we know Jembe's dexterity in terms of sending Gambian security officials to try to find those individuals and cause them harm. Were you at any point being tipped that, in fact, with what you're doing, the activism and advocacy that you are doing to bring attention to the Gambia, could in fact land you in some form of another legal trouble outside of Gambia with Gambia security officials while you were in Senegal, or people that you were with together in Senegal were undergoing serious scrutiny from the security officials in the Gambia?
Absolutely, Ibrahim. And no one was safe because Gambia is like Gambia and Senegal is like one country, just borders.
Mhm.
Right? It's just we just share borders. So I have received credible intelligence that Jammeh has in fact planted his spies, in our Gambian community. So sometimes we take extra precautions, to know where to go, where to eat, and who to visit. So, I have seen it firsthand. There was this a soldier guy called Musa Sar. Musa Sar was, attacked, by a Gambian spy who was sent by Jammeh, in
Mhm.
Dakar. And Musa escaped, he escaped that assassination attempt. Not only Musa, I know a couple of other high profile, dissidents who were, targeted, and Jammeh succeeded in getting them back to Gambia. The case of Mahawa Cham, you remember the case of Mahawa. Mahawa
Mhm.
and his colleague were abducted all the way in Casamas, and they were brought back to Gambia and they were executed. So we have received reports like that. Even myself, I had to change where I live several times. And sometimes if Gambians come to Senegal for visit, they want to meet me. I had to do some due diligence. I have to do some background check to make sure that my safety is first, because you don't trust anyone. Jammeh was so powerful that he infiltrated even the Senegalese security system. Can you believe there were Senegalese security, officers under Jammeh's payroll? I'm telling you, they were providing Jammeh information about the dissident activities because Dakar was so good to us. Dakar was a very good brother. That's why Jammeh hated the Dakar government, because he believed that Dakar was providing sanctuary to us, and secondly, most of the dissidents were conducting their activities just in Dakar, and this was having a huge impact. People like Dr. Ahmad Skatre Jane, Sexidia Bayo, all these people were coming to Dakar to conduct activities meant to make sure that there is change in the country. So Jammeh has tried all means to suppress, to arrest, and even to execute or assassinate anyone he consider a threat to his government. So the Dakar government were very helpful to the Gambian dissidents because they provide safe sanctuary for us in Dakar where we are able to practice. They could have said, no, you cannot be here and criticizing Jammeh because we don't want to have problem with the government in Banjul. But no, they provided security for us to able to, live safely in Dakar. So yes, there are instances where Jammeh sent his men to track, his opponent, because you remember 2015, the Nuru Cham coup guys, Bunja Dabo, Yaya Dabo, Faran Sanyang, all of them, after they were released from prison, they came to Dakar in exile. So Jammeh, wasn't very comfortable that all these people were in Dakar, so he tried to infiltrate. We established an association called GRAS, that is Gambians Refugees in Dakar. But even that association later on, it was infiltrated by Jammeh's agents. If you call for a meeting, nobody will turn up because you don't know who is who in that particular meeting. So, instances like that, there was a climate of fear even in Dakar. I had to change places where I live for my own safety. I cannot welcome people to my house in Dakar because I don't trust anyone. This is Jammeh. He's capable of even using your own father against you for his own gain. So it's a total climate of fear, not only in Banjul but in Dakar, which is like 1,000 miles from Banjul.
So let's still stick around before we move to the Alcamba Times. I just want us to still venture into your public career a little bit more in journalism in the Gambia, especially post 2016. So when the change happened through a presidential elections in 2016, and former President Jammeh left and eventually was exiled, we had now President Adama Barrow, who is still the current president of the Gambia, and you came back home. You continued your journalistic career which I know for a lot of people is a lot of it's a new dawn for what could be possible for our country. And there was a lot of goodwill and resources to transition the country from what we know was a democratic rule to what could become, a dictatorial rule to what could become a potential democratic system of governance where our journalists could stay in the Gambia and continue to do the work that they do. And eventually we saw you continue to work, and then you also ended up at the National Broadcasting, GRTS, and there you served as you work in the newsroom, but you're also involved in other parts of the national television's work as well. What was that experience like, and why do you eventually left the national TV station to do other independent journalistic work?
Absolutely. When we all achieve that change, our goal is to happily return back home and contribute towards rebuilding our country. After 22 years of dictatorship, there was a lot of work to be done. So I wasted no time to return home. Change happened in December 2016. Barrow came back in February. He came to Senegal in exile briefly because of the security situation. I will tell you.
Seems we're MK. Are you with us? MK is experiencing some difficulty. I'll remove him and bring him right back quickly. Hopefully he comes right back. But for those of you who are here, thank you so much. Please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel and support what we're doing. We really appreciate all of you for always being here, for always being extremely supportive, and for all of your comments that you have as well. So my guest today is Sainey MK Marenah, veteran journalist and editor-in-chief of Alcamba Times, and he's gonna come right back on and we'll continue. I'm messaging MK now. So we apologize for that technical difficulties. The internet situation sometimes is beyond what we're capable of controlling, but hopefully MK just logs back on quickly. Okay, MK is right back. MK, if you don't mute your phone, yes, calls are going to keep coming and messaging, and our conversation will continue to be interrupted.
No, my phone is on mute. I think it has to do with the connection, but my phone is on mute. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so you were basically talking about after the change, you eventually worked at the national television, and then you ended up leaving. What was that about?
Yeah, when I came back from exile, I was appointed as a social media strategist and also a reporter, an editor for GRTS. My task there was to see how best we can help the TV, regain its lost glory. What I mean regain its lost glory is to make sure that it gives space to divergent views, and also, to make sure that its social media presence is out there, because that was something that was lacking. So I was appointed by Ibrahim Asila, who I know as a very good cutter of me. We were all in exile. He used to work with the BBC. So he was appointed Director General. So his goal was to, turn GRTS from political propaganda machine for the party, to make it more viable and, more diversified. Gambians will have an opportunity to, to contribute or have their say on the national TV. So my role was to, help in that, reform. And then I worked with GRTS close to 2 years. And then I left GRTS for secondment at the Constitutional Review Commission, where I serve as head of media and communication. So immediately after the CRC finished their work, I came back to GRTS as the norm for your secondment. But looking at what was going on, I believe that going back to GRTS to serve them, because then, the coalition government reneged on most of its promises. It's looked like we are, sliding back to, the past era, of Yaya Jammeh. So I said to myself, I have been known as a independent journalist, and I have been respected for my work in the media. So I cannot allow myself again to go back and be used by the government for their propaganda. So I resigned. When I resigned, then I went back to independent journalism, was something that I have known since I completed high school, 20 years ago. So I decided to resign. So when I resigned, I pick up some few consultancy job, media and communication, because that's something that I do. I work with GAMWorks under their project called Gambia Pilot Program. It's a, I think it's a 33 million German funded project. So I run the communication and visibility component of it. After 3 months, my contract ends, and then I left Ports Authority. And then in January 2021, I said, look, I need to go, for professional growth, development. Then I decided to leave the Gambia to the US. And I came to the US in, January 2021. And few months after that, I said to myself, I have to do something for my people. And what can I do for my people? That was the time the idea of Alcamba Times came in. I say, hey, there's a huge vacuum, on diaspora media. Although during the struggle, we have a lot of diaspora online media houses, but after the struggle, most of them, are nowhere to be seen. Either they relocate back to Gambia, to continue the work from the ground, like the Fatu Network, the Keri Fatu. I say now, let me also have a diaspora platform that will focus on highlighting, the success stories of the Gambians in the diaspora, because the diaspora is a very, strong component of our economy. The diaspora contributes significantly towards the economic development of the Gambia. I say, hey, there's a vacuum. Let me come in to fill that. Not only to profile and bring in, interesting stories of Gambians in the diaspora, but I can also expand the Alcamba time to focus more on investigation, to focus more on accountability, to focus more on transitional justice processes. These are some things. So these are things that are so dear to me. So that, I conceptualized the idea of Alcamba Times. And since then, Alhamdulillah, 4 years down the line, the paper has, been doing extremely well in terms of in news that matter to the Gambians, both home and abroad. And I must comment, and the credit goes to my team on the ground. They have been very consistent under difficult circumstances, limited resources, but they have been doing extremely well in bringing news that matter, conducting huge investigation. You remember in 2022, when Alcamba was the one who investigated the multi-million dollar scandal at the central bank. We also investigated the timber scandal involving the environment minister. We also do a couple of a lot of investigative stories in the country that has impacted, the way people view the situation in the Gambia. So, we have done an amazing job in trying to, hold the government accountable, for their promises they have made to the Gambian people. So it's been a really, inspiring moment, establishing Alcamba. Apart from holding the government and others, I was also able to create employment opportunities, for a lot of young people, also mentor them, those who want to be journalists. So I have provided a platform to young people, who are interested in journalism. And I'm proud to say, since the inception of Alcamba, my reporters, my contributors has won awards locally, and thanks to their commitment, and the support they also receive from Alcamba. So that's one thing I'm very proud, creating employment opportunity for young journalists and also mentoring them to become, successful journalists in the future. So Alcamba Times over the past 4 years, have been a place for news. If we are looking for a breaking news, looking for a great analysis, or looking for an investigative news, Alcamba Times is the best place for you. And I can tell you, when you go to Gambia now, a lot of people know what's going on thanks to the great work that my team of journalists and contributors are doing on the ground.
So kudos to your team, by the way, MK. I think you guys do a phenomenal job. If you're not following Alcamba Times, please check their Facebook page out, check their YouTube page, and all of their social media accounts. They bring quality stories to their platforms, either through diaspora success stories or Gambians doing incredible well back home, or just current issues around Gambian social and political issues. Sen, I do wanted to pick your brain also on what is the relationship between Alcamba Times and, on one hand, other media houses in the Gambia, but also the Gambia government? Now, we know the government and the journalists is always a very nuanced and tricky and funny relationship as well. Sometimes we do know, you've made stories that the governments of the Gambia are always not very welcoming of or not appreciative of, and they come out to defend themselves, or they try to deflect. Governments are very good at that. In fact, so much so they go to an extent sometimes to accuse editors in chief who make stories that contravene government positions. What is your relationship like with the Gambia government in this very important work that you do? But also, how I know there is always healthy competition between various media houses in the Gambia, because there is proliferation of media houses, especially online in the Gambia, and sometimes we butt heads. It seems like I'm also introducing myself into that platform now, but I hope that we all work together as partners. But what is your relationship like with these two partners in the Gambia?
Yeah, as a guy in the media, because we believe in partnership, and we believe that the media and the government are not enemies. Instead, we are partners in development until the government see us wise. Because no government will like you to be accountable, and that's where the watchdog role of the media comes in. So me personally, I have no relationship with the government. I only have relationship with them based on professional work. Like, let's say if the Ministry of Information have a press conference, they write to Alcamba Times, like any other media house, requesting for coverage. We honor that invitation and provide them coverage. When the opposition or the other political parties like the UDP have a press conference, they wrote to Alcamba. We honor that invitation and cover their press conferences. When we are digging into an investigation story that need, the government side of the story, we reach out to government to hear from them before we publish the story. So basically, that's the only relationship that exists. But like, supporting them, or propagate their ideologies, we are not into that. We are an independent media entity. Let that be clear. Alcamba Times is not affiliated with the government or any political party. Alcamba Times is an independent news platform that is dedicated to unraveling the truth, nothing but the truth, and also to to contribute to the transitional processes that are currently unfolding in the country, to ensure that there is accountability, there is transparency, and there are reforms, just to serve as a watchdog role to the government. But there is no relationship apart from that professional relationship with the government. And I repeat again, Alcamba Times is an independent media platform that is dedicated to unravel truth and also holding the government.
Now, one of the highlights of your career, MK Marenah, is when you were hired as the communications director of the commission, the Constitutional Review Commission that was instituted to review the 1997 Republican Constitution of the Gambia, in hope that they set up a new constitution that will play a monumental role to transition the Gambia into a third republic. Eventually, after several politicizations, the new constitution could not pass in the National Assembly of the Gambia, and after several of millions of dollars were spent on this project, it failed, and it does not look like there is any prospective constitution we can envision to see between now and next year or even beyond. What was this experience like? And from your vantage position, why do you think this failure occurred? And what lessons have you learned from this?
I think, Ibrahim, the constitutional building process that I was heavily involved was a golden opportunity for the Gambia, but I call it a missed opportunity because this is an era, this is a moment that Gambians, wanted so badly. I will tell you how the constitution building process collapsed. It didn't collapse from the side of the drafters, but it collapsed because there was lack of political will from the government. In 2018, you know, the constitution, the CRC Act was passed, to build a new constitution, review the 1997 constitution, because we know that the 1997 constitution was very bad, because the constitution wasn't very progressive, even if it was progressive, but it was not being followed, by the government. So when the new government came in, they taxed the CRC to come up with a new constitution, and the CRC within that past 2 years, did a great job. For the first time in the history of the constitutional building process, there was consultation with all Gambians across the board, Gambians from all walk of life, both internal and external. The CRC went out to the people to seek their opinion as to what needs to be included in the draft constitution. We have met imams, we have met pastors, we have met civil society, we have met judges, we have met, we met all sectors,
Stakeholders.
so extensive, Ibrahim. You were following the constitutional building process. It was so engaging, and the composition of the commission was so diverse, with high level expertise. You have constitutional lawyers, you have medical doctors, you have judges in that commission. So we went out, to consult Gambians as to what they want. And you know what the Gambians were telling us? That we want term limit.
Wow.
They said because of Jammeh's experience, they don't want any leader to come and stay more than 2 terms or 5 years. They said they want accountability and transparency in the way and manner public finances are being handled. They want appointments to be based on competence instead of who you know. They want, a commission that will look into the welfare of teachers. They want anti-corruption commission. So they want, financial discipline in the public sector. So the CRC went all out, encompassing all these opinions, sleepless nights, talking to Gambians from all walk of life to build one of the most progressive constitutions of the Republic, a constitution that will stand the test of time. And trust me, anyone you contacted or you talk to will tell you that the CRC did a very great job.
Yes.
That's why our expectation was like, this is not even our constitution. This is people constitution, because we take the constitutional building process to the people. Even in Koina, a layman, a farmer in Koina took part in the drafting process. We didn't stop there. We went to the diaspora, which are the 7th region, the 8th region, you call it. We went to the diaspora. We traveled to Europe. For the first time in the history of our country, a constitutional drafting process is taken to Gambians home and abroad. Gambians in the diaspora, what did they tell us? The same thing like what Gambians on the ground told us. Just little difference, like they want diaspora voting rights, like they want to be represented because they are Gambians. If they can vote in other countries, why can't they vote in their own country's democratization process? So the diaspora also came with a lot of brilliant suggestions. We put all these things together. we didn't stop there. We went back for second round of consultation to tell them, hey, we came here, you told us this is what you want. So we put it together. Can you confirm this is what you said? And do you still want this to be, included in the? We did that. After that, when we drafted the constitution, we went back again for another consultation to make sure that the process is inclusive, participatory, and accountable and people centered. We did all that to make sure that we have a constitution that will stand the test of time. We even involve external, even take cue from other progressive constitutions like the Kenyan constitution. We had the former Kenyan Chief Justice Willie Mutinga, who came, to add his input to the to the constitutional building to make sure we have something that is progressive. So unfortunately, after our work, we submitted the constitution to the president, but then before that, we noticed they were playing politics because the executive started to raise issues with the commissioners that they don't want this, that in the draft constitution. And the commission said, you like any other stakeholders, you are like any other stakeholders, will take on board your suggestion. But that does not mean that we're going to put everything back there, because the majority of Gambians, what they are saying and what you are saying is two different things. So they were not happy. One of the issues the constitution failed is the term limit. I can tell you for sure, because they didn't want President Barrow to have a term limit in his first and second term. And in the draft constitution, you realize that, had it been the draft was passed in 2020, President Barrow would not have had the opportunity to contest for next presidential election. So,
but that's why they, part of the reasons why they always argue that the constitution was drafted to target current President Barrow.
And it wasn't meant to target him, because the people want a president that will not serve more than 2 terms. Because we have seen what happened with Sir Dawda Kairaba Jawara, close to 30 years. We have seen what happened with AJJ Jammeh for 22 years. So to avoid that, Gambians want to have a president who will serve just for 2 terms, and then we are done. So that was the reason, the constitution could not pass. And to our surprise, with all those progressive provisions in the draft 2022, the government came in 2024. They bring their own draft. They made serious changes to our original version. And what happened? It failed because Gambians won the 2022 draft, which is very progressive, which is people-centered constitution, but no. So to me, we missed a golden opportunity to make things right with the 2020 draft constitution. And I can tell you for sure, we will not get a constitution for this election now. I don't know. We can only get a new constitution if we have a new government who are committed, to bringing back that constitution. And I've seen some opposition parties like the UDP making pledges that if they are voted into power, they will bring back the draft constitution like the Barrow. But I don't trust these politicians, Ibrahima. They are all like the same. This is what Barrow told us, that when he came in, he's going to give us the new draft constitution. He's going to give us a progressive laws. The media laws still remain the same. The draconian media laws are still there. They renege on all this campaign reform. What we have seen right now, is the opposite of the security sector reform. Mere protests, people are mishandled, manhandled, people are arrested, just for speaking up. So for me, we need a very serious, opposition or government in waiting to make the change we want. But I won't trust them, because I've seen them, many of them, promise or come up with brilliant, ideas where they will do when they come into power. And what you realize is that they still want to stay more time in office than even delivering on the campaign promise.
Yeah. MK, and to buttress that specific point, I think it would be fair to say that as a country, we failed to deliver a new constitution that we intended to do post 2016. We've also
Yeah,
failed admissively in putting together the very necessary reforms that we want to do as a country, especially uh, institutional reforms, reforming our civil service, for example, to make it more efficient and effective. We've failed in all of those things. But also, we failed in a lot of other aspects too, in terms of our democratic gains, in terms of transitioning the country into a much more progressive, a much more development oriented, a much more people centered, a much more governance system that prioritizes, making people live in a much more dignified way. We've not been able to do any of those things. And now it's 2025, and we have elections in 2026. And I was curious as to what is your assessment of this current government, because we know for a fact that the current president is going to run for a third term, because, as they would say,
yeah,
there is no term limit in our constitution. And I listened to former Interior Minister Honorable Maifati with Fatu Ture yesterday, actually, I
mm,
think, yeah, 2 days ago. And basically, the argument that he was making is that time limits do not guarantee economic viability. But I was telling myself, I think intellectuals are one of the most disingenuous individuals that continue to justify capriciousness of governance and governments in the Gambia. Because what my party
absolutely.
was basically doing was to use countries such as China and other countries that don't in fact have an explicit term limit, but they are very progressive. They're very progressive in terms of their development. And you look at around the African continent, a lot of countries
Mm,
experience forms of civil war, a result of failures of government to basically leave office, especially after two terms. And our own history is replete with that. So Jawara stayed for 30 years, Jammeh came and stayed for 22 years. And you are telling
yeah,
us that Barrow has the inherent right to
mm,
stay as long as
yeah,
possible, so long governments are going to vote for him. That's a recipe for disaster.
yeah, yeah,
And I was just
yeah,
curious in terms
absolutely.
of what is your objective assessment of this government, and do you think they've made a legitimate case for 2026 for governments to vote for them?
Ibrahim, for me, this government has failed Gambians woefully. This government could have been the best government the Gambia has ever had, from Jammeh to Jawara, simply because this is the only government that has collective popular will that bring them into power. This is a government that the entire country, irrespective of party, irrespective of tribe, irrespective of region, all came together to vote out Yaya Jammeh and bring Adama Barrow into office. That's unprecedented. It has never happened. It has never happened. And when they came to power, it's the only government also that has international goodwill. You remember 2018, the donor conference in
Yes.
Brussels?
Yes.
Gambia got the highest political, international political will to support in rebuilding our country after 22 years of brutal dictatorship. But what happened? What's the outcome of the Brussels donor conference in May 2018? What happened to those pledges? Pledges. What happened to the commitment of our international partners? It all fed out because they have not seen the political will and commitment of the Adama Barrow government to support the transitional justice processes. How can a government who is trying to make so what happened in the past repeat what was happening in the past? Take an example. A government of the victims is now dining and whining with people who, you know, when I talk about I get kind of emotional. I put myself, because it doesn't allow government to work with those who commit crime, a human right violation, ordinary Gambians. You appoint these people to top leadership. You appoint them as ministers. You appoint them as directors. And these are people who commit those violations against. Are you serious? So to me, this government has an opportunity they miss, just like with the TRRC, with the new draft constitution, with the security sector security sector reform. So to me, they could have been the best government, but they missed that opportunity. And trust me, nobody in their right mind will trust this government, because since they came into power, corruption has been normalized, systematic. I don't say Gambia wasn't corrupt under Jammeh or Jawara, yes, but the corruption and lack of accountability is second to none. How many times have we seen media reports about corruption scandals from the port authority to the GPA, office of the president? And what did the government do? Who do they prosecute? What efforts are they doing? Nothing, absolutely. They promise us an anti-corruption commission. What is the state of the anti-corruption commission? Even though I noticed that they are trying to set up the secretarial with the appointment of some commissioners, some of whom have been confirmed by the parliament. But how long can Gambians wait to ensure that our own government we vote into office are put into check? That's why when young people came out, Gala, the Gambians against me, that I was like, yes, this is what Gambia need. Demand accountability on the streets, yes, and they're going to listen. And this is the generation of young people we are seeing. So they will continue to face challenges like this if they fail to embark on reforms they promised during the coalition government. So to me, this government, they did well. So in other areas, they did well in terms of opening up democratic space. Yes, but there is more work to be done in the country. Gambians need to feel that, yes, we voted for this change, but go to the streets of Banjul, there is total discontent. Everyone is angry. Even if you don't do anything to anyone, people are just angry because the system that's supposed to protect them is them on daily basis. So to me, this government has to check themselves if they want to win the mandate of the Gambian people. And it will be tough. 2026 presidential elections, it's going to be a very defined moment for Gambia. As one politician will say, it's going to be a situation between the forces of evil and the forces of good. So as Gambians have to choose whether they want to go with the forces of evil or they want to go with the forces of good. And those who want to go with the forces of good want to make sure that there is change. Those who want to continue with the forces of evil want to see, corruption, lack of accountability and transparency to continue, because Adama Barrow has not done enough, to prosecute people who are implicated in corruption. Otherwise, we would have, have a lot of impact. Corruption have denied Gambian basic. Go to the hospital. There is no medicine. Go to school. Not enough teachers. But if there is no corruption, we would have closed those loopholes. We would have get medicines. We would have get teachers. We would have get better service delivery. But we can't, because we have normalized corruption in every sector in the country. So to me, Barrow government to be serious with Gambians need to move from word commitment to action. You cannot say I am committed to fighting corruption, but I have not seen that commitment being translated into action. So I hope and pray that Gambians will make the best decision in December 2026 to elect a president that will, bring their interests, on the table, that will fight for them, that will respect their dignity as Gambians, but not to vote for a government that you have to beg them to do certain things they have voted to do. It's the same that we have that kind of government operating in the country.
MK, finally, one last question, and then I'll let you have something additional to say. But we've talked about the performance of, we've assessed the performance of this current government getting into a decade of their time in office. But I also want us to focus very briefly in the oppositions, at least viable oppositions that have the potential to unseat President Barrow for 2026 elections. Now, there's a lot of discussion happening. There's a lot of new political parties that are also coming. And there's a lot of questions hanging over a lot of parties, but also a lot of people are still undecided. We know how Gambia works. And what we can all agree on that a lot of people are clamoring for is to see some form of partnership between political parties to form a grand coalition to contest against President Barrow, because we know in our history, we've never had a president who has succeeded in becoming a president without being in some form of a coalition. And regardless of whatever position some parties in the Gambia believe that they are the biggest opposition parties, standing alone by themselves only seems to me, by virtue of the numbers that we've seen in previous elections, to favor only President Barrow. What is your assessment of the viability of the opposition parties who are in the Gambia? Do you think it is time for Gambians to consider a United Democratic Party full-fledged government in the Gambia, or should UDP put some of the somewhat idea of that we are the biggest party, we don't need other parties, or all the parties should stand to think about ways and means of ensuring that they come together, including the PDRS that we know for a fact played a critical role in setting up or putting the framework for what we know was a 2016 coalition that unseated President Barrow. What is your assessment of the governments in waiting in Gambia?
Ibrahim, I don't think any opposition party alone can unseat the current Barrow administration. Remember, Barrow is still in a coalition, even though there is no more 2016 coalition. But Barrow is still with a coalition of almost 16 political parties, even though some of these political parties are one-man party, but Barrow still have, sort among those, previous coalition partners. And for the opposition to make a headway in 2026 presidential election, they must come together to form a formidable coalition. This is something that I don't foresee because of the past experience with 2016 coalition, because we have seen what coalition when coalition come together, what happens, in the case of our own experience in 2016. But for them to take on Barrow, they must come together as one formidable entity and challenge him. Otherwise, Barrow will just have a landslide to the 2026 election. Because look, this is a man who has all the state apparatus, state mercenaries at his disposal. He has money, he can influence a lot of things. And the opposition, they don't have that resources. The UDP could be a formidable lead in that aspect, because they are the country's biggest and largest political party, you like it or not. But UDP alone cannot against against Adama Barrow in 2026. UDP alone cannot do it. They must, convince other political parties to join them, in order for them to be, for them to win 2026 election. And it will be very hard because the oppositions themselves are not united. And how can a fragmented opposition win against a well-organized NPP and their allies. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And the objective of the NPP is to make sure that the oppositions are not united. That's their goal. Because against them, they're going to win. But their goal is to make sure, look, they will never unite. And if that happens, it's going to be an automatic win for Adama Barrow. So to me, it's high time for the Gambian opposition parties. They still have time. It's like 1 year to next election. They can still come together, irrespective of their differences, like how they did it in 2020, 2016. They all come together, drop their egos, and see Gambia has, Gambia first. And then they win against Jammeh. If they can do it in 2016, they can still do it in 2026, provided that they are serious, they are honest, they are truthful about the coalition. And before going in for coalition, the mistakes that happen, they should review those mistakes and make sure that it do not repeat itself again. When they came in 2016, they said 3 years, Barrow will call for an election. Whoever win, go in. But what happened? It's 9 years now. Barrow is in power. Because they were not doing the things the right way. Hadn't been they put paper to pen, sign everything. Even that, there still be a problem. But I believe they did not do their homework well. That is what led to the current situation we are facing. So it's never too late. If the opposition come together, there is a high likelihood that they might defeat Adama Barrow. Because ordinary Gambians don't like this guy. You ask them, they are suffering. How many young people are dying at sea right now? I couldn't believe these past months, thousands of Gambian young people are leaving, knowing that they might go and they might not reach, they might die, but still they choose to embark on this dangerous journey through the back way to Europe. That shows to you that people back home are suffering. But how can we end their suffering? Is to come together and vote out the government that is currently in charge, and bring in a new one that hopefully will inject hope in young people. But until then, President Barrow will continue to have, should the opposition remain, fragmented, should they remain disorganized, that will all be in advantage of Adama Barrow. I'm hopeful that hopefully they will all come together as they did in 2016, change the incumbent Adama Barrow and rescue our country from this bad governance.
Thank you so much, Sainey MK Marenah, editor-in-chief and founder of the Alcamba Times. If you're not checking Alcamba Times out, please check their Facebook account, check their website account out, support what they're doing as they continue to add, their voice to what is happening back home, but also bringing you important investigative reports in regards to issues around our country. But Sainey, finally, what is your call to hope? Why do you continue to be super obsessed in a positive way about the issues of the Gambia? We know you live in the United States. I live in the United States. We are only a few miles apart between where you live and where I live. And you could just invest your time and money and resources just to focus on here with your family. But we know you don't do that. Any Gambian event that happens in Seattle, you are one of the very first people I always see. You always provide yourself and your resources and your pen and your camera to come and record and also interview people to share what is happening, especially in our Gambian community. And I don't think you get enough credit for that. So, but that also, there must be something that inspires that. What keeps you going? Why do you continue to do what you do?
My love for my country, my love for my people, that's what keep me going, because I'm a guy who believes that Gambia will always rise. And despite all the challenges back home, wherever we go, we still feel very proud that we are from the smiling coast of Africa. Because being a Gambian, I would say is the best thing to happen to me. I can proudly tell you that that's the best thing to happen to me, because I'm proud of who I am and I'm proud of my country. My country is going through hell, I would say, but despite that, I still love my country and her people. That is why wherever there is Gambian event or any way I can support anything Gambian, I gladly pick my mic and my pen and book, and I'm there. You said sometimes I might not be credited or recognized. Yes, because I do sometimes have that feeling that, hey, I'm doing a lot for my country, but I don't feel recognized. But that's normal. If you don't feel recognized by people, that should not stop you from doing what you love. And that's what is keeping me going. Sometimes I'll be like, take an example for Alcamba Times. You know, I I am doing everything single-handedly from my own pocket to make sure that I have a news platform that run 24 hours. Sometimes we go for months without advertisement, and we have reporters, we have staffs on the ground that need to be paid. So I have to work extra hard to make sure that that is covered. I'm doing that because I love my country. I want to empower young people. I want to contribute towards the development of my country. So things like that keep me going. I am a fighter. I hardly give up. Somebody was like, MK, you still very active in journalism. Like 10 years ago, I know you as a young reporter walking in the streets in Banjul. I said, that's the same MK, because my passion is the love for the job and love for the country and our people. And I will continue to work hard to spotlight Gambia on the global map and to also profile and bring in great things that our country people are doing in America, in the diaspora, and all over the world. And I will tell you a secret. If you believe what you are doing, or you believe what you are doing is right, nothing can stop you. And that's my mantra. I will keep going until my last breath, because I love my people and I love my country, Ibrahim.
I promise this is the last question. Are we envisioning or are we anticipating a return or reincarnation of MK in the government space away from United States? We know it's a thing that happens. We all go to the United States or abroad. We get knowledge, we get material resources.
Yeah, absolutely.
Eventually, we go back home.
But that's my goal. I want to build an empire. I want you to come to Gambia, and I invite you to Alcamba Time Studio. I say, Ibrahim, you remember you had me on your show. Today, enter the studio. Let's have this conversation. I want to build a media empire. I want to go back home. I'm tired of the US. I feel like nobody knows me in the US. When I'm in Gambia, if I'm on Caraba Avenue, 3, 4 people will be like, hey, MK, how are you? I can walk from here to Solana or Seattle. Not a single person will say, hi, MK. Because they don't know who you are. So I miss home. I wanted to go back home, but as I said, I am here for a mission to build my career, make raise resources, and go back to Gambia and empower more young Gambians interested in journalism communication. So my goal is to go back and continue to contribute towards the development of my country. So inshallah, Ibrahim, I am working so hard, to make sure that I get back home. But then I need to raise that resources so that when I get back home, it will be smooth for me to, do what I love doing. That is to build my media empire. And I'm glad to say that, we are working very hard right now, to put our house in order on the ground ahead of the election so that we can better serve our Gambian people. Because this election will be a defining moment for the Gambia. As I said, it will be between the forces of good and the forces of evil. And I hope the forces of good, win against the forces of evil. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, MK. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time, dedicating this hour and a half to talk to me. You could have spent your weekend with your wonderful wife or doing very important stuff that I know you're always busy doing.
Absolutely.
So this is important to me, and this is very personal as well from your little brother to you. I really appreciate you coming
Yeah,
on the
and to you too, Ibrahim. You know, I'm proud of you. I'm because you have also been doing very well with the community. You know, you have been involved with the community. You could have said, "Oh, I'm new in Seattle. They don't need my service," but you made yourself available and you are serving the community. You know, so and one way to serve your community is through ventures and platforms like this. You know, be part of the community is important. Sometimes we feel rejected, we feel, you know, a lot of stuff, but that should not, you know, stop you from doing what you love. I don't care even if one person watching me and you today, but we have an opportunity to speak to each other and share ideas. But you say, oh, no one watched me. 3 people, 4 people are watching me. My next show, I'm not doing it. You are killing your spirit. And I have seen that commitment from you. Keep it up, and then God knows what the future hold for both of us. And it's great to have you, you know, with me. You know, as I said today, you are the one interviewing the Mr. Journalist. So I hardly do interviews though. I like to put people under the microscope, but I don't want people to put me on the spotlight. But thank you so much. I appreciate this. And then hopefully we'll do this again when
Yeah.
those big plans I have for Banjul and Alcamba materialize.
No, for sure, MK. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much for the compliment. But yes, that's what I do. What I do. This journey started way back. I think all of my life, my very young life, because I'm still very young, has been in public service. It has not been through platforms like this, but it has really been about, being involved in community, being engaged in adding my
Yeah.
voice, different things that I care deeply about. And honestly, the views and all of the acknowledgments are great, but like you, MK, really, I don't think much about it. To be fair, I do this because I really want to bring out Gambian stories. I like to celebrate Gambians and what they're doing. If you are Gambian and doing incredible stuff,
Yeah.
I reach out to you. Some people get back to me, some people don't. Some people
Yeah.
literally
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
immediate reach out to me. They're like, "Yeah, I really want to come to your platform." I
Mm.
said, "Well, I don't own this platform. It's a conduit for conversation, which you do very well with Alcamba too, because
Yeah.
you are
Absolutely.
one person that celebrates every. Literally,
Everyone.
sometimes I know of people that are grabbing it somewhere. I said, "How did Sainey know about this story?" Because you
I know.
basically know about their people, you know.
And some people are like, "Do you sleep?" I say, "Yeah, I sleep."
But that is nice, Sainey. That speaks to who you are. You can say
Yeah.
whatever you want, but I think
Yeah.
us celebrating each other, us
Yeah.
acknowledging each other, pushing each other to be seen, is something that will it goes a long way. Because that speaks to who we are as Gambians, and I hope more people can do that too. Everything is about. It's not about materially incentivizing, always trying to get something
Absolutely.
out of it. It will come if you're doing a good job. You'll be rewarded for it. So stay consistent.
Mm.
Have some grace on yourself. Sometimes I know it could be isolating. This country is isolating. I
Yeah.
lived here for
Absolutely.
5 years. I've been around. I think we came nearly almost same time or a little
Yeah.
longer. But I
Absolutely.
know what we all go through in this country. But it also offers us a home. It offers us a lot of opportunities to keep doing stuff like
Absolutely.
this and eventually go back home. But I really, and I mean this when I say I wish you all of the best. And if you
Thank
need
you.
me for anything at all, bro, I'm always here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's good to talk to you, Ibrahim.
Good to chat with you, Senny. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you to the audience.